Good morning, everybody. Carmen here, and for this week's How Do I, we are going to talk about adding pizzazz to your projects with different decorative stitches and threads. So you can see I have a whole bunch of fun stuff set up here. And when I think about adding some fun to my projects, one of the things I love to do is to play with decorative stitches. All of us know about the basic stitches that are in our machines, right? We have straight stitches, we have zigzags, we have hemming stitches, we have buttonholes, and most of us use those stitches most of the time. But pretty much all of the computerized machines on the market today also have a beautiful suite of decorative stitches. So first I'm just going to show you some samples of some lovely decorative stitches. So here, these are some stitches right here that I think are built into the Bernina 770 Cafe machine. But you can see how fun are these. All of these different little stitches. I love the flowers, the swirls. What a fun way to add. You know, you could just make a table runner of just stitches, right? And what's also really fun, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, but sometimes the way they look on the screen and how they stitch out are sort of different. And so it's really fun to stitch them all out and get an idea of what those stitches could be used for. I know many people, when they get a new machine, they will just make a stitch out like this and just make something where they just stitch out every single stitch. So that way they can really see what the stitch looks like, because it can really help you visualize when and where you might use these fun stitches. So some other fun stitching that I have here is I have these stitches are called floating stitches. And the FOF icon has these stitches. And what's cool about these stitches is it doesn't look like they're connected. And these were done with metallic thread. And metallic thread is one of the things we're going to talk about today, because metallic thread is a great way to add some sparkle to your embroidery designs, or sparkle to your decorative stitches. Either way, and we're going to talk about how to make metallic thread work for you, because as we get closer to the holidays, I find that this is the time of year where people are more excited to use metallic thread. And so I thought it would be really timely to sort of talk about how we use metallic thread with our decorative stitches, and then how we also spice up project with decorative stitches. I'm going to show you one more sample here real quick. These are a whole bunch of different decorative stitches, and quite a few of these you can see. Some of them may even be stitch combinations, which is something else that we will go into here in a little bit. But you can see there's all sorts of fun different ones. Like I love this guy with little sewing machines. Down here we have text. So you could also type in text, or this is one where this one might even be built into this machine saying handmade. Either way, but it's really fun. A fun way to use those little alphabets that are built into so many of our machines. Oftentimes people are like, well, why would I ever use an alphabet like that in my machine? I'm like, well, you can make a quilt tag. You could use it as a decorative stitch. I've made, a lot of times when I make quilts in one of the borders, right? I might throw a decorative stitch down. It can be fun to sneak, like if it's a gift for somebody. Maybe you make a flower leaf combination and you throw like the kiddo's name into that, and that's built into the quilt. There's a lot of fun things you can do when you're playing with all of these different decorative stitches. Okay, so why don't we talk about how to get our machine set up for decorative stitches to be successful? Because there are a couple of different things that you are going to want to do when you're setting up your machine. So the very first thing when we're talking about decorative stitches is the foot, okay? So right now what I already put on this machine is the end foot. And every machine is going to come with a standard sewing foot, and that's the brother or baby lock line, that's called the J foot, but every machine has a standard sewing foot that is a standard zigzag foot, and you can see what the bottom of it looks like. It's pretty much flat. This foot over here, the end foot, you can see right away that one, it is wider, right? Two, it has an open in the front, which helps you see the stitches better. And then three, this is really the big deal here, it has this cutout sort of on the back where the bottom is recessed. And the reason for that is when you are doing a lot of these decorative stitches, you are putting a lot of stitching down, and you need to have space for the foot to glide over it. Have any of you ever had that experience where you're doing a stitch and like the stitches get bunched up behind the foot and it doesn't feed forward? That can often be just because you need to put on a foot like this that has space for that stitch. And a lot of our machines actually tell us exactly which foot to use. And in a few minutes here when we actually get this machine stitching a little bit, I can show you that on the screen. But you want to use this N or whatever for your machine is the decorative stitch foot. And usually it's going to have all of these same characteristics where it's a little bit wider. It's for sure going to have this groove on the bottom. And then oftentimes it also has this clear front to make it easier to see. So we're going to snap that guy back on here. I'm going to set that there. We'll put it on in a second. The other thing that I wanted to tell you about is if maybe your machine doesn't have an end foot, or if you are working on slippery fabric, we do have some new feet that have just been released. And this is, you can see this is the same as this foot here. It is an end foot, but it is made out of an anti-stick material. So it's like a Teflon foot, but it is now a decorative stitch Teflon foot, which is pretty awesome because if you're going to be doing decorative stitches on anything sticky, like if it's vinyl or a fabric that just is sort of grabby, this can be really helpful. This set here comes with the decorative stitch foot. It also comes with the Teflon standard sewing foot, and you can see how it looks very similar to the J foot there, but it is out of this non-stick material. And then finally, it's also coming with a 1/4 inch piecing foot that is a non-stick foot, which is pretty sweet. This is a brand new set. It works on most Brothers and Baby Locks, and this can be a nice thing to have in your tool chest of things. So when you're trying to do decorative stitches, you might be able to be more successful depending on the fabric because you have the best of all the worlds. You still get that groove on the bottom, you get the wide front, and you get the non-stick. And you're not limited to just using the non-stick foot for those. So let me just toss these guys back in here. Okay, so I'm gonna come around here, up to the front here, and I'm gonna put this foot on, and my foot just snaps on there. I'm gonna set this out of my way, and we're gonna talk a little bit about metallic thread now. So metallic threads are a really fun way to add sparkle to your designs. You can see here in this embroidery has metallic thread all through there, right? Really fun. It adds a lot of sparkle to this little embroidery design. And we already showed you, hopefully you're not just seeing my back there, we already showed you how fun this like metallic thread is. The metallic thread can be intimidating to work with. And so we're going to talk through some of the different ways to set up your machine for the metallic thread. So the first thing is this guy right here. There's a couple different spool stands. This one is called the UT. It's the Ultimate Thread Dispenser. It's by Wonderfill, and you can see this base spins here. And on the Brother machines, the way that this little dude hooks on is going to hook onto your spool, your upright spool holder here. And this guy hooks onto the bobbin winder on the Brother machines. A lot of machines have one that flip up. And then this guy is just going to set right on here just like this. And you can see what this guy does for you is it really makes it so you aren't going to have twists and things. It just like pulls the thread here really nicely. And it spins and moves, and it really does a lovely job. So that can be one option for metallic thread. The other option is to have a secondary spool stand out here. And the secondary spool stand can be a way for you to do the same thing where it's going to do nice feeding. You're going to set it here, and then you're going to feed it in and through your machine, just like that. Okay, so let's talk about the stitches here. You can see right now these are the utility stitches. So many utility stitches, right, that are built into this machine. And these are those ones you probably use most of the time, right? Over here, there's the character decorative stitches. And there are tons. Just for the fun of it, we're going to flip through a lot of these different stitches so you can just sort of see. And I would encourage you to go play with your machine and see what your machine has to offer, because there really are tons and tons of fun stitches in here, right? We could just sort of keep going. We're only on page 13 of 33. What I do love about these big touch screens now is it's so easy to see what is going on. And we're just going to keep flipping through here, and you can just see so many fun decorative stitches. And then like there's different words that are built in, really wide stitches, some are more narrow. But as you can see, playing with these can help you sort of figure out which ones you want to work with. We're going to go back to the same window again here. We're going to go to the little flower because I wanted to show you quickly how easy it can be. In case you didn't feel like this was enough stitches and you need more stitches, we can actually build our own stitch. So if I go down here, see if I've missed it, and maybe I grab this little leaf here, and then I go down and I grab, maybe I want to grab this little flower. You can see how my machine has hooked those together. So I have a leaf and a flower. And right now, if I was to start stitching this, it would stitch just the leaf and flower. But I can also go down here and tell it, actually, I want it to just keep going and go leaf, flower, leaf, flower, leaf, flower, leaf, flower. And so like if I was to actually do that here, I think my machine is even threaded. So one of the things that I highly recommend is auditioning stitches. So you can see here I was playing with some different stitches because I wanted to see what they look like. Sometimes on my screen it's not clear to me that this guy is only a couple millimeters wide and this guy is like, you know, 5 or 6 millimeters wide. This is a very wide stitch. And even though I can read it on my screen, I can really visualize it much better when I see it stitched out. So if I'm gonna hit start here, and it's going to go through and it's going to go do my leaf. And then the flower. And it will just keep doing that until I tell it to stop. But if I want it to end at the end of my pattern, I can always re-tap my little star button there and then it will just finish the next stitch on that pattern and it will stop for me, which is really pretty handy. So you can see there, it just did my little leaf flower, and it could keep doing that. And this is the same way that you might do lettering, right? You can go in and type a word. You could type like, I love you, or handmade, or really anything that you want in there. You could type someone's name, you could type a whole quilt label, but it's very easy to add these designs and manipulate them inside the machine. So let's talk about the other things that I have done here to be set up successfully for metallic thread, because I realized I didn't talk about a really important one, which is the metallic needle. So I currently have a metallic needle in this machine, and the metallic needles are really handy. One of the things I would always have in my stash, so that way if you decide as you're working on a project, I don't know about you, but a lot of times, maybe just because I'm a creative thinker or processor, I oftentimes start my project, I'm like, I'm gonna do X, Y, or Z, and then partway through I'm like, oh, but wouldn't it be fun if I added metallic thread to this, or if I added this thing? And that's where it's really nice to have some basics just in your supply, so that way if you decide you wanna throw in some metallic thread, that you can just you have the metallic thread needle. I also find that these MyPad sewing machine organizers for your needle is really helpful, because something like metallic thread, maybe you're only going to do it for a little bit, so you haven't probably used that needle up. You can then just pin the needle in here so you know you've used it and it's not brand new, but you know which needle it is. So this can be really handy, particularly for the specialty needles, like if you ever use wing needles or twin needles. You know, I find that like the needles that I use all the time, you know, usually those, by the time I'm done with them, they just need to be tossed out, right? Because I've used them for 8 hours of sewing, or I've used them until I felt like they were, you know, typically you want to use a needle for 8 hours or less. My general rule is per project, depending on how big the project is, or sometimes if your needle starts clicking, or your machine sounds different, I'll put a new needle in, or if your machine is skipping stitches, it means it needs a new needle. But something like a metallic needle you might not use as often, and that's where I find this is very handy to keep track of those needles. Okay, so we talked about needles, and then let's also talk about the thread I've been using here. I'm using the Kingstar metallic thread, and Kingstar metallic is like 100% our favorite thread right now for metallic, because it just works super well, and we have very few breaks, and very few, I was doing an embroidery the other day, I did the entire thing on full speed, it just did it, no problem. I didn't have any problems. As I was testing out a couple of things here, nothing, I didn't have stitches breaking, and of course I was using a metallic needle, and I was using the Ultimate Thread Guide or a thread stand, But these are really lovely. We do have some holiday thread sets right now if you're inspired to add some sparkle to something that you're working on. We have one that is the red and green and silver and sort of gold, and that's called the Holiday Quartet. And then this one is more of these lovely, yummy, like jewel fall tones that I just love all together there, the bronze and the copper and the purple and that gold, and they call this one the Fall Quartet. And these are really fun, and they're sort of a value because you're getting them all together. And then the other thing that's nice is your bobbin. So like when I was auditioning these, I just have a white pre-wound bobbin. I'm using the Quilter Select ones, but I do find that I love using, with decorative stitches, it can also be very nice to have a matching thread color on the bottom, particularly if you want to see it on both sides, or if for some reason your tension gets off a little bit, then the same, you can just have it both colors on both sides, if you know what I mean. And this is nice because it has all of them pre-wound, and I do just love pre-wound bobbins. Obviously you can wind your own bobbins in all the colors that you want, but I love using a pre-wound bobbin. Is there a question, Carrie?
Yeah, so Kathy actually asked, just as you started with bobbins, what do you use in the bobbin when stitching with metallic thread? So it sounds like you're not using metallic in the bobbin as well.
I am not. Now, you can use metallic in your bobbin. Every machine is different. So the thing about metallic threads is you need to find what works really well for your machine, because some machines do just handle metallic a little bit better than other machines. I almost never use metallic in my bobbin because normally I'm doing something like this where like no one's ever going to see the back side. So I'm not going to use my metallic thread in my bobbin. I'm just going to use either a matching color, or I will use a neutral color like a white or a gray or something in my bobbin. But if you were doing something that you were like, I really want this to be both sides, then by all means you can put metallic thread in your bobbin, but you just have to play with it and see what's going to work well for your machine. I think that there's more testing involved if you're putting metallic thread in your bobbin, and some machines do better with that than other machines. And then the other thing, I know this is going to sound super strange, but it's happened to me, and I suspect it's happened to you. Some days our machines, or just what we're doing, things are just harder. And if you ever run into that with metallic thread, or like I've done that before when I've been quilting like late in the middle of the night, and all of a sudden nothing is working, just set it aside and come back to it the next day. Reva reminded me that sometimes static electricity can sometimes like make your metallic threads behave not as nice. And so sometimes just trying it on another day, it might work better. We are also always available in our stores if you ever have questions or troubles with metallic thread. I think the reason why we've been so excited about Kingstar is we literally have had the least amount of problems we've ever had with any metallic thread with this thread, and I think it's something about the way that they have created it, and I think it has a little coat on it, so it's like just really solid metallic thread.
So when you're sewing with metallic threads, do you need to slow it down and stitch slower?
That is an excellent question, and that has been historically what I have always told people. I have found that with the Kingstar, I'm able to sew more quickly. I tend to not like to sew particularly slow because I'm just trying to like, I got a lot going on. I want to get her done. But yes, if you ever, and this is true of any thread, right? If you ever feel like you have any finicky thread that's if you just misbehaving a little bit, or it feels like it's a little bit more finicky, by all means, if you sew a little bit slower or you embroider slower, you will probably have better luck, for sure. Okay, any other questions about those? Okay, so let me show, I'm gonna have a couple more samples here. This one is a fun one that shows some different decorative stitches combined. So you can see we have the satiny decorative stitch here. We have one that looks like cross stitch. Here you can see this is a combination, right, of a leaf and flower. Now, what is fun is, I didn't show you this on screen, but when this one was created, it could have been that this second one could have been mirrored, so they could have been the ends of those leaves could have been pointing each other, if that makes sense. You can really manipulate all that inside your machine to get exactly the results you want. And then this has some nice, they just stitched on that rickrack there, so really fun little tea towel. This one here is some bobbin work, or some of those thick decorative stitches that are double stitches, so they're really dense, but you can see how this is an embroidery design that's been mixed with decorative stitches and how fun that looks, right? There's lots of ways to play with all of these stitches and play with colors. And like I said before, auditioning your stitches is like really important. Please test them out. You know, don't make a beautiful taffeta skirt like this and then not test the stitch. I highly recommend you always want to test the stitch. And the thing that I've totally forgotten to mention is stabilizer. So like right now, what I have in here, I just have some tearaway stabilizer between my layers. And you are always going to want to use some stabilizer. And this is true of any decorative stitch. This is true of even sometimes a zigzag stitch. If you ever get a stitch that is puckering, that is pulling, that is bunching, even though you have your decorative stitch foot on, any of those things, you just need to have more stabilizer, because when you're doing a big stitch that's really wide, right? If your fabric doesn't have any stabilization, the stitch itself can just pull that fabric in, if that makes sense. So we want to use the stabilizer, and you can just use a tearaway and then tear it out. But for when you're doing the actual stitching, you're for sure going to always want to use some stabilizer. And that's why it's always great. You can test it on a test piece of fabric. If you have extra fabric from your project, doing a quick test once you think you've got everything set up is also a great idea, because fabrics, depending on what fabric you're stitching on, might change what your machine needs. But there are so many fun things that you can do with decorative stitches. Is there a question?
Yeah, so which stabilizer do you recommend to use with metallic threads and decorative stitches to make quilt labels?
I would probably use the Quilter Select Tearaway. And the reason why I would use the Quilter Select Tearaway, Quilter Select is made by R&K, which also makes Floriani stabilizer. You could just use one of the Floriani stabilizer products, but what the Quilter Select stabilizers have all been designed for is to be used in quilting. And so what their goal is to support your threads just as much, but to leave a better hand in your quilt. And so they have a tearaway. They have very similar types of stabilizers as Floriani stabilizers, but they're all going to leave a better hand in your quilting project. We do have those on our website, and we have quite a few of them. We have some of them in the stores, but we have all of them on the website. Okay, great. Well, I think that I'm trying to think if I forgot anything else.
Carmen, didn't
yes.
you have a stitch book you wanted to talk about?
Thank you, Carrie. So this is why Carrie is super helpful. I did totally forget to talk about the Big Book of Stitches. So if you need more inspiration and ideas, Bernina just came out with this book, and it's called the Big Book of Stitches. And you can flip in here and see that there's tons of different, they talk about, using specialty needles and threads, stitch play, quilting with stitches, creating a stitch book, overlock stitches, stitch fixes, all sorts of things. And I bookmarked for myself here this page here that's called Stitch Mixology, and they have all these fun examples of different stitches and how they can be layered together to create different effects. But this book is really fun, and even though it says Bernina, yes, if you have a Bernina, then they even have pictures of things of how you set them up in an actual Bernina. But most of these techniques are all techniques that apply to any sewing machine that has decorative stitches. So this is really sort of a fun tool as well, if you want more inspiration of different things you can do with stitches, because there really is like an endless amount of things you can do with stitches. And then I guess the only other thing that I didn't mention earlier that I meant to grab is the other thing you can use with your metallic threads in particular is a thread net. And the thread net goes up and over the whole thing. It should look like a candy bar where the ends are hanging out the end, and then you would just tuck it in the bottom. Don't cut them. Part of how a thread net works is it is actually designed to be extra long. And I didn't grab when I was going to show that, but that is another thing you can do to help keep those metallic threads from becoming unruly on you. So I hope you enjoyed this. Lots of fun stuff. We would always love to see what you're playing with. If you ever, are playing with different things and you want to show us stuff, post it to our Facebook page or shoot us an email. We always love to see what you are working on. And I hope you were inspired to go play with your decorative stitches because your machine has tons of them and they are super fun. Happy sewing, and I will see you next time on one of our How Do I's 10 a.m. on Tuesdays.